Tonight's final score doesn't tell the whole story. And if you watched the game like I did, you saw a Cowboys team that walked into Philadelphia loose, physical, and absolutely willing to scrap. They left the Eagles battered and bruised even if the W didn't fall our way. I want you to hear this up front. This was a statement performance in a lot of ways. Dak Prescott showed the kind of leadership you want from your QB. He was talking to teammates, baiting opponents when he needed to, and yes, he made the tackle on that Sanders fumble that likely saved the game. That play alone says a lot about his competitive juice and how invested he is in every single possession. Offensively, the Cowboys ran the ball better than most expected. Over 100 yards on the ground, 2 rushing TDs, and a balance that felt like a breath of fresh air compared to last year's one-dimensional looks. The offensive line deserves credit too. Dak wasn't sacked, and that gave him the chance to make plays with his feet and his arm when the pocket was impacted. But let's be honest, there were moments that still sting. CeeDee had huge yardage and influence, but the drops were costly, and that fourth quarter sequence where the play calling leaned deep instead of working intermediate routes left a lot of fans scratching their heads. On defense, what I want you to remember is the tale of two halves. The first half had some rough spots, some calls and non-calls that changed the tempo, but the second half was a very different Dallas defense. Adjustments, better tackling, and a bend-but-don't-break mentality that held Philly to just 3 second-half points. You could see the physical toll on the Eagles by the end. Dallas came after them. There's also a bigger picture here. Nobody expected the Cowboys to come into that atmosphere and cover like they did. We were 8-point dogs, and we left showing there's something to build on. Now, quick interaction. In the comments right now, type yes if you think the Cowboys played better than you expected tonight, or no if you think the loss exposed real problems. I want to hear that vote right away. If you're new here, please subscribe and click the bell. We're pushing for 16,000 subscribers, and every one of you helps get us there. And if this quick take resonated, smash that like button so more Cowboys fans see the video. All right, that's the high-level look. If you want film-level breakdowns on the offensive rhythm, the defensive halftime shift, and the officiating moments that mattered, keep watching because I'm about to dig into it. The real story of this game for me comes down to the offense and how it looked under Brian Schottenheimer in his first real test. Let's start with the positives, because there were a lot of them. The run game actually showed balance. Think about that for a second. Last year, Dallas was at the very bottom of the NFL in rushing touchdowns, yet in this one we saw over 100 yards on the ground and 2 scores. That's not just numbers on a stat sheet, that's tone setting. Javonte Williams picked up tough yards, Miles Sanders ripped off a 50-yard run before his costly fumble, and even though that play stung, the commitment to establishing the ground attack was obvious. Dak Prescott himself looked mobile again. There was one snap where he could have been sacked 3 different times on the same play, but instead, he slipped out and scrambled for 4 yards. That's the kind of mobility we weren't sure we'd see. Again, after his leg and hamstring issues, seeing him healthy, confident, and willing to use his legs is a massive development for this offense. Now let's talk receiving. CeeDee Lamb was the star and the frustration all in one. He hauled in over 100 yards, 7 catches total, and really was the primary weapon that kept the Cowboys moving. But the drops hurt, and one of them came on a critical sequence in the final drive where Dallas had 3 timeouts, 2.5 minutes, and every chance to put together a game-winning possession. Instead, 3 out of 4 plays went deep, including on 4th down, and while you can respect the aggression, it felt like the wrong call in that moment. Mix in some intermediate routes, crossers, something to get CeeDee moving into space, and the outcome might have been different. Dak gave everything he had, but at some point, play design and situational awareness have to back him up. Role players like Jake Ferguson and Luke Schoonmaker chipped in small gains, but there wasn't enough complementary production behind Lamb. George Pickens had just 3 catches for under 30 yards, and that can't be the ceiling for him moving forward. Now, one of the most encouraging notes was the offensive line. Not only did Dak not get sacked once, but young guys like Tyler Booker and Tyler Guyton stepped up. Guyton, who barely practiced in camp, looked physical, looked engaged, and even though he had one moment where he got away with a punch, his effort stood out. Protecting Dak in that hostile environment was a win in itself. Before I break down the defensive story, let me ask you, on that last drive, should Schottenheimer have kept going deep, or should he have mixed in short and intermediate routes? Drop your take in the comments. Just write A if you like the deep shots, or B if you wanted more balance. And if you're enjoying this breakdown, help the channel grow by hitting subscribe, because we're pushing for 16,000 Cowboys fans here. And I want you on the ride. When you really break this game down, the defense told the story of 2 completely different halves, and that's where I think the Cowboys deserve a lot more credit than they're going to get nationally. In the first half, it looked shaky. Jalen Hurts had lanes. The Eagles were moving the ball without being forced to punt, and the Cowboys seemed a step behind. Add in a handful of questionable non-calls, holding that looked obvious on Donovan Wilson, and even some situations that reminded me of what Micah Parsons usually fights through, and it was tough to watch. Hurts especially was the problem because even when you had coverage and even when you had pressure, he found ways to use his legs and extend drives. Those critical first downs he picked up were the difference early on, and if you're being fair, he was the player of the game. But here's what impressed me. The Cowboys' defense didn't fold. They regrouped at halftime, and the second half looked like a different unit. They allowed only 3 points in those last 2 quarters. 3 points against a Philly team that just raised a banner at home in their season opener. That's no small thing. The front tightened up, the tackling improved, and while Saquon had around 60 yards on the ground, the explosive plays dried up. The adjustments were clear, gap integrity was better, linebackers flowed downhill faster, and the secondary stopped giving up easy yards. What also stood out was the physical punishment Dallas dealt out. By the end of that game, you could see the Eagles were the team that came out more battered and bruised. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't flawless, but it was physical, and that's something you can build on. Of course, you can't ignore discipline. Jalen Carter getting baited into ejection was a turning point, and Dallas has to make sure they don't end up on the wrong side of those emotional moments in future games. One bad penalty or one mental slip can swing an entire night. Still, when you step back, this defense left Philly with its identity intact. Fast, physical, aggressive, and capable of mid-game adjustments. And let's be real, if the officials had called a couple of those holds the right way, we could be talking about a completely different outcome. Now I want your take. Was this defensive improvement in the second half a sign of real progress? Or do you think it was more about Philly slipping up? Type yes in the comments if you believe it was real growth, or no if you think it was smoke and mirrors. And while you're at it, make sure you're subscribed. I'll be bringing you breakdowns like this all season long, and hitting that button gets us one step closer to 16,000 Cowboys fans riding together. So where does this all leave us? If you ask me, the biggest takeaway is that the Cowboys showed they can stand toe-to-toe with one of the league's most physical teams and not blink. Sure, the final scoreboard hurts, but this was about more than one result. Offensively, we saw balance, protection, and a quarterback who looks confident and mobile again. Defensively, we saw resilience and the ability to adjust mid-game, which has to give you confidence moving forward. And physically, we saw a team that actually left the Eagles more battered than themselves. That's a tone setter for the rest of the season. Now, let's be honest, there are things that need fixing. CeeDee Lamb can't keep dropping balls in key moments, no matter how productive he is overall. The play calling on that final drive has to be more situationally aware. You don't always need to go deep, especially with timeouts in your pocket. And discipline needs to be locked in because you can't count on baiting the other team into mistakes every week. But here's the encouraging part. This wasn't a collapse. This wasn't a team overwhelmed. And it wasn't the kind of flat opener that kills momentum before the season even begins. Instead, this was a fight. And one play here or there could have flipped the outcome. That's why I keep calling it house money. Nobody expected Dallas to cover, nobody expected them to match Philly's physicality, and yet they did both. Looking ahead, the Cowboys get extra days before facing the Giants, which gives the roster time to heal and the staff time to clean up some of the rough edges. That's an advantage you want this early in the year. So, here's what I'll leave you with. Confidence. Not blind confidence, but earned. Confidence from what we saw in that second half. Now I want to know how you're feeling about this team. Drop a comment and rate your confidence in the Cowboys this season on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being, we're ready to shock everybody, and 1 being, still not convinced. I'll be pinning one of the best comments to the top for the next video, so get your thoughts in. And if you're new here, don't leave without hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. We're closing in on 16,000 Cowboys fans, and I'd love for you to be part of that push. Hit like if you're proud of the fight this team showed, even in a tough loss, and share this with another Cowboys fan so they can join the conversation. Because trust me, this season is just getting started, and we're going to break it down every step of the way right here.